Aloha mai kako. Mahalo nui ia'o ko Pakahi for joining us again today for our third session of Hoʻokele Naʻauao 2022. Our theme, of course, is ʻAina, sources and systems today. And so we're super thrilled to just be able to be in conversation with a bunch of folks in librarianship and in Hawaii that are, we're able to sort of bridge these conversations together. This session that we're in today, I'm so thrilled to be a part of and be able to sort of sit with these two wonderful, amazing wahine. This is called Ka Wai Hāpai Co-Creation Process and Practice. And really one of the primary goals of this session is to sort of give our audience a little bit of a fly on the wall view of what it's like to be in that co-creation process and what it's like to be in discussion with some of our consultants who have shared so much of their ʻIke and their time and with us to be able to sort of incorporate this well into library practice, into knowledge organization, and really be able to center Hawaii into what that looks like. We just came out of really an amazing session where we got to see one model of what that looks like to have community-centered practice and what the implications and the impact, positive impact can be for a community. And we're really hopeful that we are doing something similar here for Hawaii, uplifting our kanaka in libraries and archives in ways that maybe haven't always historically been the case. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and start to introduce our roundtable, our panelists today. So we have joining with us Kumu Maelia Loebenstein Carter and Keahiahi Long. And myself, I'm Annemarie Paikai. Keahiahi and I are both on Ka Wai Hāpai. Keahiahi's official title is Magic Spinner. And, Kumu Maelia is her kumu and her cousin. And their ohana is so renowned for hula and has been sharing so much of that with us throughout this project. I am one of the project leads as well, and my focus is more ʻŌlelo Hawaii. And so the way that this sort of session is going to work is that I'll be sort of in a moderating role, and we'll be able to sort of see how, what it's like for us to discuss with Maelia some of these concepts of our project. Ka Wai Hāpai as a project, we went over this a bit this morning, but just to kind of give you some insight, we work in consultation with 6 loea or cultural practice masters, including Kumu Maelia. And since November 2021, we've been meeting with them monthly to sort of go over ontologies and talk about different kinds of relationships and protocols, and of course language as well, with the intent of working towards what a knowledge organization system centered in Hawaii will look like. Kumu Maelia was also a consultant for our previous project, Lau Ā Lau Ka ʻIke, Knowledge Overflowing, where we investigated the co-creation of ʻŌlelo Hawaii controlled vocabularies. I myself was not on that project, but that was Keahiahi Long as well as Shavonn Matsuda, who is our project lead, our PI for this project, who isn't with us today, but is backstage and yeah, can come out anytime she wants. Together, the 3 of us are going to work to reflect on some of the consultation meetings. We're going to look at some of the challenges that maybe we've come across, some of the successes, outcomes, and some of the next steps. Like I mentioned in the beginning, we're really hoping to demonstrate what this conversational style of meeting looks like and what the co-creation process looks like. So we have an example of something that we've come up with, that an iteration of something that we've been working on, and we'll be able to discuss with Kumu Maelia what that looks like and if that's properly reflecting some of the concepts that she shared with us in the past. And so we're really, really excited to talk story again with you folks. And I think with that, I'm just gonna go ahead and start us off and pass it off to you folks to sort of tell us a little bit about yourselves and maybe go into a little bit about your relationship with one another as well.
And so you wanna go first?
I knew you were going to say that. Okay. Aloha mai kākou o Maelia Loebenstein Carter ke Kumu Hula ka Pā Hula o Kauanoe o Waʻahila. I am blessed to be a 6th generational Kumu Hula. Our ohana comes from Hana Maui, and my grandmother, oddly enough, in at the end of the month on the 30th, it'll be my 25th anniversary. She gained her angel wings and I became Kumu of this halau. And so it's been a real big, kind of a big momentous time for me, just because I'm looking forward as to how I can I've bridged this 25 years of passing on the ʻIke that grandma has shared with me. But, you know, I come from the generation that was taught everything was just up in here. We didn't get papers. We didn't get a lot of information. It was just the information that was given to us from our kumu. And so now, as I'm looking forward to passing on the torch, eventually, not quite yet, to my cousin Keahiahi, it's this project just, it really resonates with me, because it's how am I going to transition all of this ʻIke to her in this modern day world while maintaining the integrity of what my grandmother and my tutu lady and, you know, all of my kupuna have passed on through the generations. So it's really exciting to be here. So mahalo for this opportunity. On to you, Keahiahi.
Thank you, Auntie, for joining us. Mahalo for all the things that you join us in. And thank you for being so willing to participate in all the crazy things. Yeah, just really grateful to you for everything. Yeah, if I said how many things I was grateful to you for, I would just go forever and ever and ever. So my name is Keahiahi Long. On my name, it says Ka Wai Hāpai just because I'm organizing some of the back end stuff for today, but that's not my name. My name is Keahiahi. I currently live in Mauna Loa. I actually just moved home. So I'm living with my dad and my brother and my bonus mom. And it's really nice to be in the home that my grandparents bought and that my dad grew up in. I started dancing hula, I think I was like 6, and I was dancing for Auntie Artist Gomes. And one day, my grandfather, Maelia's grandma's brother, came and watched something that I was performing in. And he said, "Hey, if you really want to do this, you need to dance for my sister, Maelia's grandma." And so my grandfather, Collins Long, he was the baby of the family. He was the youngest of 15. Maelia's grandma, Auntie May, she was the oldest girl. Anyway, so my grandfather took me to my first Pā Hula, my first hula practice. He drove me over. And I had no idea what we were doing, but there was Auntie May standing in the backside door saying, "Oh, you're gonna come dance for us today, yeah?" And you know, kupuna, they sort of ask you without really, like they're not asking, like they're telling you. And so I was thinking I was just gonna go watch, but there I was dancing in the back row. And so I've been dancing hula for a little while. And like Maelia said, our family has been practicing hula for all of these generations. Our hula, like she was mentioning, comes from Maui. Our hula style also really influenced by Daddy and Mama Bray. And so I'm really grateful to be on this work and to be in this project. I am currently the librarian for Kamakakuakalani Center for Hawaiian Studies. I'm also Shavonn and Annemarie's friend. And that's sort of how I got roped into this. You know, it was, I think 2013, we were doing a poster conference for the LIS program here at Kamakakuakalani in Halaua, Haumea. And Shavonn and I were doing a poster about Hoʻokele Naʻauao. And that was our first year that we had hosted Hoʻokele. And she also did her own poster on her topic, which was knowledge organization and Indigenous library systems. And I just remember thinking, like, how did you have time to do your own when you also helped with this one? Like, I could barely contribute to our project together, let alone her, like being her like a whole other project. Anyways, and so it's ever since then, like 2013, that I've been sort of introduced to this idea of knowledge organization and this idea of Indigenous librarianship. What does it look like for our communities to be involved with information practices? And yeah, so if you think about how I got here, it's mostly because your friends drag you into things and you say yes, and then you figure out that that's where you were meant to be. So mahalo, Annemarie, for moderating this discussion for us.
Yes, mahalo nui yaʻolua. That was perfect. The next question, you sort of already spoke to that, but just wondering, just wondering what brought you to this project, but also what are your specific kulana within Ka Wai Hāpai? We've already sort of established too that, you know, you folks have different kulana already with your ohana and within halau. And I'm just wondering if you folks wouldn't mind talking a little bit about your kulana within this space and if that's shifted and how that's impacted the project or anything like that. If you folks wouldn't mind speaking to that.
I can take this one first. Yes, okay, so for this project, my title that I gave myself and that my friends said, sure, whatever you want, Keahiahi. My title for this project is Magic Spinner. And I came up with that mostly because, right, I look at the roles that Shavonn and Annemarie have as the other, primary investigators for this project. Shavonn is really the principal investigator. She's the project director responsible for holding, just all the things and making sure we're moving forward. And then I look at Annemarie, who is our ʻŌlelo Hawaiʻi lead, and who's wrestling with terminology, who's wrestling with appropriateness of terminology, who's wrestling with relationships and the terminology for the relationships. And so I sort of looked around and was like, okay, well, what can I contribute? And it just sort of feels like all the other puka, right? My job on the project is exciting because I just sort of get to jump in here and there wherever's needed. And so that's sort of been my role for the project. In Halo, right, when your Kumu, when your auntie or cousin is the Kumu, you get to do lots of fun things. You didn't know you were going to do all these fun things. You didn't ask to do all the fun things, but then you do all the fun things. And again, right, like my journey to be on this project, right? You didn't know you were going to be there, but when you got there, you knew you were supposed to be there.
I love it. Miss Magic Spinner loves to spin everybody around her into her realm. And so that's how I first became involved in this project, because just like how she says, oh, I get to do all of these fun things. And she goes, Auntie, do you want to participate in something really fun and interesting? That's how she always proposes. And of course I'm going to say yes. And then she lays it all out. So I should really ask for the disclaimer of what I'm committing myself to, because before I knew what I was, then she said it was like, oh, this is going to be a couple-year project. It's like, oh, okay. But I don't mind because, even if I just have a little minuscule bit in this greater plan, and this scheme that in the schematics of it, that I can contribute any bit, I'm excited. Because part of the problem I had as a young Kumu, and coming from my grandmother, who was just like, just this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to do, and having limited access to the archives, whether it was at State Archives or Bishop Museum archives, it was getting into the age of technology where we would start our fact sheets for competition, or having to answer questions for haumana, where in my generation, it kind of was like a standard, like you were supposed to know this. Your kupuna were already supposed to tell you this. But for a lot of kids coming up, especially through the halau, we could see that they lacked what we thought was common knowledge. And then now having to go and find resources for it. And, everything I would start with were off of whatever little napkins or little pieces of paper stuck in between books that my grandmother would have, or really bad typewritten words. And there were all kinds of, inaccuracies. There were no kind of diacriticals. And so for the majority of students who weren't proficient in ʻŌlelo Hawaii, it was like, how do I do this? How do I know what's correct? Because I have 4 different versions of the same mele from 4 of the kumu that my grandmother might have been influenced by in her lifetime. And so trying to channel that, it was really hard for me. I started off on an old word processor where just to do kahakos, I'd have to go back to the line above and everything would have to be double spaced just so I could get kahako in the right place. And so, fast forward it 25 years and now everything is saved on Google Drives and I can just share information, and I'm learning. That's the thing. It's like I'm like not even proficient in all of this. I have to turn to Keahiahi. It's like, okay, this is where your line of work is. And I think it's amazing because in her accepting this, I think it's going to balance really well with the kuleana that she's going to have when she assumes this hello, and how much better and informed the next generation, well, maybe 2 generations, because I'm going to say it goes about 2 generations. Those haumana are going to have it, having the accurate information of knowing like the full mo'olelo. So there will be no reason to have anybody ignorant in in hula or in any other mea that's being documented. And so I'm just really excited that just my experiences and my my mistakes, my little idiosyncrasies in how, because Kumu, and I know it's not just Kumu hula, any Kumu in Nā mea Hawaiʻi, our brains, like, we operate on different levels. It's not just the physical, it's the spiritual, and all of those little details for us are important. So it's not just a cookie cutter, open up a book or look in an encyclopedia and I can find what I'm looking for. So it's really exciting to see you folks grasp that and be able to run with it. So Ayala.
Yeah, Amelia is absolutely correct. I just sort of pull her into things, right? My hula aunties, my hula sisters. I even, like, for this session, I sent her the information 2 days ago, and I'm just very grateful that she showed up today early on time, makoko. But I think this is part of the reason why we wanted Maelia to join this project and why we wanted Maelia to join our previous project, Lau Ā Lau Ka ʻIke, is because of the wealth of knowledge that she has, right? We think about Maelia, and I don't mean to make you uncomfortable. I know this is, like, always the weird part, but, like, she's just such an amazing knowledge holder, right? She was raised by her grandmother, and so she has this sort of, like, kupuna mentality, right? She can see things. You're not old, you look young and beautiful. But, right, like, she sees things in a way that, like, my generation just can't appreciate. And so that's one of the reasons why we asked Maelia to generously share her time and her knowledge and her expertise with us, because there's just something to be said about growing up with your kupuna, growing up in halau, and now trying to think about that transition.
Mahalo nui to both of you. I think some things that you're both talking about that are so interesting to me and really have come out in our project too is the idea of how much our transition of knowledge, the practices around transmission of knowledge have changed, and how much we're trying to figure out how to recapture what that sort of used to look like, but also could look like for the future as well. And so I think, you bringing in your community, I think, has been such a profound, really positive impact for this work, because we really, at the core of what we're trying to do, is really key in on the relationships, and those relationships do not, like, that is who we surround ourselves with and who our community is, and that's reflected in the work that we do. And so I think it's been so positive and so fruitful that we've been able to have your folks as your relationship be a part of this project, because it does really allow the conversation to go places that maybe it wouldn't have had you not had that previous relationship. I think another thing too that Maelia, that you were talking about that was really interesting too, is just how, or that made me think about just the differences between we can get so siloed into academia, and academia has historically not always been such a positive, just like libraries and archives, it's not always historically been super careful and caring about our communities. And I think this ability and this, what's so special about this project, is that we're really trying hard to do what we can. We still represent academia, but because we have these relationships and because we're trying to be conscientious of how this ʻIke is transmitted and cared for, and the protocols around that and the language used around that is really coming through. And so I think when you talk about, your kupuna leaving all these notes behind, and how that was an example of how that ʻIke was transmitted down to you, I think we're really trying to look at what that means for this project and this process, and what it could mean for seeking out that ʻIke and access to ʻIke for future generations as well, and just improving the vitality of our practices.
Annie, can I just jump in real quick?
Yeah.
I just want to tag team on what you talked about as far as, like, the separation between academia and maybe community. I think that's why the project of our project is called co-creation, right? Like, we're, in addition to representing academia, we are also librarians, right? And library spaces haven't always been kind spaces. They're not always safe spaces for Indigenous peoples. And so I think that's why there's a real focus in our project on co-creation. Right? It isn't just like, yes, we are Kanaka, but we also realize that there are perspectives and views and expertise outside of us, right? And so that's why we're trying to bring in our communities. And so I really appreciated how Sharon and Dodie had navigated their community relationships. It's actually been really inspiring for me. And now I have 100 ideas about things we could do for our project. But yeah, it's that idea of co-creation, right? It's the idea of shared expertise, of shared authority, of shared knowledge, and not always shared 50-50, right? It's recognizing how those are shared and when those are shared.
Mahalo for that. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I want to shift us a little bit, and maybe we could do this like a two-part sort of thing, but I do want to hear, especially Kumu, Maelia, but both of you actually, what your sort of reflections and takeaways of the project have been. If there's anything that in this co-creation process, we're sort of developing this and figuring out what this means and how, as Keahiahi, you just said, we have our own limits, obviously, based on expertise and like who we are and the way that our communities have evolved and who's been able to share ʻIke with us. Things have changed so much. And so I'm just wondering, as we develop this co-creation process, what are your folks' reflections on how it's been, and if there's things that we can improve, just that can be improved, or how can we really continue to care for community through this co-creation process?
You can go first.
I think it's been wonderful that we can bring our communities in, right? Like we are our relationships embodied. And so it wouldn't make any sense for me to do this project or to do anything really without recognizing my ohana, right? And that's the people who take care of me, that's the people who embrace me, and the people that I have kuleana to. And so I think it was natural for me to want to bring Maelia and my Hula sisters and my Hula aunties onto this project because they're always forefront, right? Like they're always just around, like physically and mentally, emotionally, spiritually. I know that I'll be driving and Maelia will be like, where are you going? And I'll like look around like, where, how did she find me? They're around, your ohana are around you. And so it felt natural for me, yeah, to bring Maelia into this project. I think that the relationship and how we work with our community consultants is one of those things that keeps growing, right? Like it grows from different project stages of the project. The relationship and the way that we worked with our community consultants in Lolo was to have great focus groups, yeah? And that sort of shifted into this project, Ka Wai Hāpai, where at this time, we've mostly been working with our consultants individually, right? And so Maelia hasn't been in a room with the other 5 consultants that we've been working with yet. And so that's what I appreciate about the process is that, there's no roadmap, there's no answers, right? We're trying to figure out our way through this. And I appreciate that our consultants see that and are gracious and flexible to go along this journey with us.
Yeah, when you first asked me to be on this panel, I'm like, how is this even going to translate? Because how do you get something that's here onto a piece of paper? How do you take the traditional knowledge, and some things it's like, it's so hard to explain sometimes, for it to make sense in a Western concept. And so watching you folks try to find proper terminology, for certain things, trying to balance how things have expounded from just the physical manifestations or the physical, like this is what we know we can document, and then figuring out how the spiritual fits into that, because that's a lot of what the traditional knowledge that we are carrying, what needs to be shared, and watching the 3 of you try to figure out the best way. Because remember, the first time we had our conversation, I was like, how is it, because it's Pandora's box. When do we say it's enough or it's too much? Because not all the ʻIke is for everybody. A lot of things are, it's like, grandma used to say, I'll let you know when I think you're ready. Right? It's not, and that's the struggle for me. It's because everything right now on the internet in this Western mindset, in Western education, is one press of the button and anybody can Google anything and they can become experts, right? You just kind of paraphrase what you read and all of a sudden you do a vlog or you do something and you get one like and one share, and all of a sudden you become the expert. And so there is a real fine line for me when on some of this stuff, because some of the things that grandma's giving me, I haven't even shared with Keahiahi because it's not her time yet. And so we have to be careful. And that's one thing that I had told you folks. It's like, we have to be really careful. You can't just ho'olaha everything because it's not for everybody. And so and it's not just hula. Yeah, when we start looking at all traditional practices, that relationship between the kumu and the haumana, if we're looking at it in traditional imparting of knowledge, it's when the kumu feels the haumana is ready to accept. And I told you folks, this is a huge kuleana you folks are undertaking, because then how do you disseminate when, how much, and who has access to all of this ʻIke? And so for me to watch you folks, at every meeting, come up with your diagram and your bubbles and how it intersects, and how do we keep that that aloha in it, because that's the one thing that has to be present. Because if we're just doing it in a Western concept where it's just educational material, and we're not looking at it as these are momi from our kupuna, and all of that momi that was shared comes with aloha, how do we then translate it into a Western library system, right? And the access. And I mean, that's a huge kuleana. And so it's really interesting to see this process unfold, and how you folks are taking a lot of care, to malama everything that everyone has shared with you. So mahalo. I do love that.
Mahalo for sharing. That's great. And I think it's a perfect time for us to really transition into sort of what our consultation meetings look a little bit more like. Generally, after we've had a consultation meeting, we go back and take the ʻIke that, not take it, but look at what was said and shared and what the discussion looked like, and create an iteration of some of these larger concepts so we can get towards what a knowledge organization system can look like, get towards what controlled vocabularies can better look like. And so in that, we're gonna kind of run through a quick exercise that we would normally do in this kind of a session. We just have quite a few more people that are joining us for this one. And so we're going to look at what we're calling an authority template. And this is going to focus in specifically on one wahi, which is Mānoa. And so I'm going to pass this over to you, Keahiahi, and you can sort of share, speaking of our bubbles and our diagrams, we can share one of our maps, and you folks will just go ahead and walk through that. Yeah.
And so just to give some context about what I'm going to show, right? We have done a whole year of consultation meetings with our consultants. And in the beginning of our project, we talked about our framework, right? How did we want to approach this? And what were the things that we wanted to encompass within our project? And then through those meetings, we started to lay out what different relationships could be like and what different entities could be like. We realized that ʻAina was a focus, that ʻohana was a focus, that hana or practice was a focus. And so we started to lay down some of these big ideas, yeah? We're calling them bubbles because you're gonna see bubbles in a bit. So we started to lay down some of those big ideas. And so once we had those big ideas sort of set the net, if you will, now we're starting to look at a specific big bubble. We're starting to look at ʻAina. And we talked a little bit earlier about why we're starting with ʻAina. Yeah, we had talked about ʻAina and Lau Lau Ā Lau Ka ʻIke, and now we're doing ʻAina sort of as the focus and starting point for Ka Wai Hāpai. And so what I'm going to show is a diagram. Well, first I'll show a diagram, and then I'll show sort of an Excel sheet about how we're conceptualizing, articulating aspects of ʻAina. So the particular ʻAina that May and I are going to talk about is going to be Mānoa. I don't know if Maelia shared this, right? But she's the Kumu hula for Pā Hula o Kauanoe o Waʻahila. And Waʻahila is that ridge that separates Mānoa from Kaimuki. And so both of us have lots of pilina to this ʻAina. And so we'd like to talk through some of the characteristics of Mānoa. Can all of you see that? Is that showing okay? I know it's a little small, I know. I'm going to zoom in, but just wanted to show the big picture for a second, right? Mānoa is in the middle. The yellow bubbles that you're seeing are some of the major facets or aspects that we want to sort of get into. And so there are 8 big aspects that we've been wrestling with so far. And those are wahi, kona or ko'olo, talking about what side of the island, proximity, whole to part, as in what other ʻAina are included in the ʻAina that we're discussing, proximity, part to whole, looking at the ʻAina, what is it a part of, ohana, who are some of the ohana that are kaulana in this area, and not just kanaka, but also akua. We're also looking at hana or practice. What are some of the practices found in this ʻAina? And we have a field for kahoʻike ano, which is a natural language description, if you will, of what that space is. And then finally, we've got features, which are sort of natural features, right? Rain, winds, streams, etc. And so I'm just going to walk us through some of these aspects, right? And I'll start with wahi. So before wahi, this was called apana ʻAina, and we're still not sure if apana ʻAina or wahi is going to be the term. Like Annemarie had talked about, we're wrestling with language, we're wrestling with terminology. What makes the most sense, not only for our kanaka today, but kanaka before us and kanaka tomorrow. And so wahi is the term that we've used to describe or to hold the place for where we describe the kind of ʻAina that it is, right? So for Mānoa, Mānoa is an ʻili within Waikiki, yeah? And you can sort of see that with this idea here, proximity, part to whole, right? Mānoa is the part within the whole of Waikiki. Other facets that we're looking at are kona and ko'olo. What side of the island is it on, right? Because this is not only a way that we today talk about our ʻAina in relationship to the side that it's on, but our kupuna also used these terms to describe the areas that those those places were located, yeah? We know that ko'olo, that ʻAina and ko'olo are going to be more rainy and are going to be near mountains, yeah? ʻAina and kona are going to be on the south side and they're going to be more dry. And so we talked about putting this characteristic in to show again, right, if we know what Mānoa is and we know it's in ko'olo, then we know that it could be rainy. If we know that it's in kona, then we know that it's on the south side. So that's what that field is. And actually, Maelia, I wanted to ask you if you have any thoughts about that field. We have been wrestling with whether or not to include kona ko'olo as an aspect of talking about in a particular ʻAina. Again, it makes sense because we use these terms, right? Like we gotta go to the ko'olo side, we gotta go to kona, but we're not sure if it's something that one applies to all islands, or two is something that you think is really important to know about a place.
Well, I think it is important to know, but I think if you only focus on kona and ko'olo, I think somewhere within the wahi, you also, because if we're doing ʻili, we have to do the greater ahupua'a, we have to do the moku, you have to do the moku puni. I mean, all of those things need to be included. You cannot just, for me, it's like, because you want to, if you're doing proximity whole to part or part to whole, I think all of those little details need to be in, so that if it's in this ʻili, if it's in this ahupua'a, if it's in this moku, and then of this moku puni, all of that kind of needs to be put in some place. Yeah, you don't want to leave it out. But for me, it is, I guess Mānoa wouldn't be the greatest because it already is in the moku of kona, for Oahu. So those kind of things might get confusing to those who are not in language or, not kama ʻAina with that. They'll be like, wait, it's on the kona side, but it's in the moku, it's in the moku of kona. So I think you have to give a little bit more detail. That's just my thought.
Well, mahalo for that, because that's something else we're struggling with too, is a disambiguation, right? Because we have kona on several islands. When I say kona, what kona, right? Same with kailua, right? And so we're trying to figure out what makes the most sense to articulate when. How do we disambiguate? We know how like Wikipedia disambiguates. We know how, library records can disambiguate. And so we're just trying to figure out what makes the most sense for us. For example, right? I could say kona Oahu, and that could be the entity. Or I could say kona Oahu Pai Nā Hawaiʻi, right? There's different ways that we can sort of think about how these particular ʻāina are articulated. Yeah, what's the best way to share what I'm talking about? Yeah, I kind of want to go to this features section here, and I just threw up some of the things that were coming top to mind, but in no way is this exhaustive, right? We've been talking about features and we're using the word features because we just have not found the right term to express what we're trying to articulate. Also because we're not sure what we're articulating here in this field. And so features for now, right, could be nahiʻohiʻona maybe, but we're encompassing natural land features or geographic or geologic sort of natural phenomena in this field. And so that includes hills, right, pu'u, streams, kawai, wind, makani, rain, ua. And so that's some of the things that I've listed here, right? The kakea, kahaukani as the makani of Mānoa, tuahine as the ua of Mānoa, Waʻahila as another ua here in Mānoa, waihi, right, one of the wailele at the top of the base of Mānoa. Hau, we know that Mānoa, right, kahaukani, famous for hau here in this area. Kalehua vehe, the break out in Waikiki as you extend past Mānoa, and lehua kia, right, those white lehua up in the back of Mānoa. So just wanted to get your thoughts about how you feel about this particular area. If you think that there are things that make sense here, things we should include more of, things that don't make sense here.
No, they all make sense. I think, it's just a little piece of what needs to be there. And I'm just, trying to rack my brain for what it could be addressed as. But no, I think the features are important because that's what makes this ʻāina this ʻāina. And yeah,
That's tough.
Yeah, that's a tough one to just do it
Yeah.
in. We're gonna need a whole nother couple sessions for this.
And that's the thing too, because again, it's sort of like a catch-all, like we're just throwing, these things in there. We haven't had the conversation yet about what are the subcategories in features. Like, should we make features winds, right? Features rains, features waters. Does that help to sort of articulate or express again what those characteristics are?
Well, I think it just, for me, it kind of depends on who you are doing it for, right? Because if it's like native practitioners, they're already going to know that you're not going to need to do that, right? You just need to list the names. But if you're doing this for the greater cause, you're gonna have to separate it, because just like with our wahi, there are lots of names that are interchangeable and duplicate. So wind names might be place names, rain names might be place names, or hill names, and so you have to, I would think, subcategorize them so that it gives everybody a level playing field, so that you have this ʻIke, and it's like, so that they know that this feature is a wind or a rain in this particular place right now, and that if they went to Hawaii Island or Maui, there might also be a duplicate, but I think you do need to do that.
Yeah.
I just think that it is more work, but it gives it more clarity.
Yes. Yes, and thinking about clarity, I'm thinking about vehevehena and how what exactly do those scope notes look like for those fields. I'm just smiling as I look at Annemarie, who gets to wrestle with creating the scope notes for us, for our fields. And actually, Annemarie, I'm wondering if you have any mana'o about what we're talking about the disambiguation, or about the terms that we're discussing.
Mahalo for offering. Yeah, I do get the wonderful and exciting job of describing all of this and describing how we use all this and how we populate these things and how we how we use it and how to make this useful. And so the only things that I'm really thinking about is I'm looking at the chat and I'm trying to sort of pull that up with what we're talking about, is looking at is it useful for us to like think about these things in different ways, and how does this apply across many different kinds of ʻāina? Manoa is so lush, and we know quite a bit about Manoa, and how will this evolve, and what are the things that we need to put into place that will help other ʻāina that we maybe know less about, is something that I'm thinking about. I'm also thinking about, you know, features is right now, as you mentioned, it's such a general term at this point, and we're thinking like, I'm just what someone's already brought up, what do we do with some of our more man-made features, and how does that apply here? And so and how, because those also define ʻāina, the ʻāina that we are at, because it defines things like the practice, which I think we're going to get into in a little bit as well. And so I don't have anything profound to say other than that's the mush that's in my brain of how to encompass all of this, and excited about that kind of that work.
Yes, it's mush, right? It's all mush. Like sometimes we'll leave our consultant meetings and even our own like internal meetings and just be like, what the heck did we talk about? Right? Like sometimes it feels like we're going in circles and there's just no end in sight. But yeah, I think we'll get somewhere at least. But I just want to talk about the built environment that you were talking about. And I'm going to borrow this idea from Shavonn, who has been helping us think through this. And so we're thinking that maybe built environment can go in hana, in practice, right? Because the things that are built are related to the practices that take place in those ʻāina, yeah? And again, something we're wrestling with, not something that we've written in, you know, permanent marker. It's very much in pencil that we're erasing and rewriting. But that's why we have, right, like things like buildings, right? Like University of Hawaii at Mānoa, Mid-Pacific, Punahou School, right? They're part of the practice of Hoʻokele Naʻauao. And we can think about this too in terms of heiau, right? There's Kūkaʻoʻo in the middle of Mānoa Valley. That I think it's the castle estate that manages that area, right? Kūkaʻoʻo heiau, which is a heiau mapele, right? It's an agricultural heiau for lono, right? And so the practice there, right? The hana there would be mahiʻai, yeah? And so the built environment or the heiau is attached to that practice of mahiʻai. And again, this is not the only way to think about our relationships between our built environment and ʻāina, but this is one way. And I think we really recognize that ʻāina helps to illuminate all of the other areas that we need to consider, right? We're looking at ʻāina, definitely need to think about practices, definitely need to think about ohana. Yeah, so I think that's something that starting with ʻāina has helped us to see that, like, hey, you can't forget about these other areas, right? ʻāina won't make sense unless we can also sort of draw out what those places will be. I just want to look at one more thing before I shift us into something else. And that was this here, this sort of field that we're calling kahoʻike ano, sort of like a general description for that ʻāina. And so, you know, Shavonn was thinking that maybe this could be sort of pulled from place names. Yeah, and so that's what this first gray bubble is here. This is straight from Puku'i and Albert talking about different places, and this is what they describe Mānoa to be. Underneath that is ʻŌlelo noʻea, right? Because we understand our places through our poetry, through mele, through oli, through ʻŌlelo noʻea, through moʻolelo. And so these are some snippets, right, from ʻŌlelo noʻea, but again, doesn't have to be ʻŌlelo noʻea, could be mele, could be moʻolelo. These are some snippets that talk about Mānoa, right, that help us to envision and conceptualize what Mānoa is. So I just wanted to see, Maelia, if you had any thoughts about this here, about how we articulate what Mānoa is. How do we describe Mānoa?
Well, yeah, and see, and I don't know if that, because again, the way the brain thinks is that, okay, so to me, in my practice, it wouldn't just be ʻŌlelo noʻea. There needs to be a subcategory for mele, for hula, which then would go into moʻokuauhau, which would go into religion, which would go into mythology, because all of that is connected. Yeah. And so yeah, the way the brain works. But to me, it's like that, yeah. I'm so sorry to make that more work for you, but that would be the way it is, because I don't want to just have, like, when I'm researching, I'm not just looking up Mānoa. I'm looking up wind, rain, legends, religion, people. I need to know all of that, because even if it's just one line in a mele that I'm trying to choreograph, I need to have all of that background to understand where it is that I'm going and what I'm going to create. So for me, I think there needs to be a lot of cross references in this area because and you know, like with everything, right, it's always see this, see that, or you know, check this out. But I really feel like it's gonna be a little bit more than just that, or it needs to be, in order for that, all of that knowledge to properly be shared.
No, mahalo for that. I think you're really helping me to envision. Again, I have not crossed this with anybody else on the team. These are just my own thoughts. You're helping me to sort of think about these relationships, yeah? Because on the diagram, they're pretty linear, right? They go from like one to the other, from big to small. But what you're helping to illuminate for me is that they don't just need to be one directional and they don't just need to be singular, right? Like there needs to be several lines coming from each of these, yeah? And we sort of need, and this is actually something that, you know, our friend one of my mentors here at Kamakaʻu Kalani had shared with us in the previous project, Lau Ā Lau Ka ʻIke, right? It needs to be the oscillating, expanding, collapsing entity, right? Like we need to be able to enter from any point, given what we know, right? And then connect to things that we're looking for.
Well, and I think, you know, and this is where it can get, this is where I told you guys on that first day is like, what you're trying to undertake is amazing because at the crux of it all is the pilina. You know, I'm looking at your little thing of Ohana, right? And yeah, you got the family names. And then just, okay, for Kahala Opuna, well, she doesn't just belong in Ohana. She belongs in Kiniakua. She belongs in ʻŌlelo. She belongs, you know, she's going to not just be in Mānoa. She's going to be in Waiʻanae. If we're looking at the whole ʻŌlelo, that's just one little thing. And so when you look at this whole, for me, all of it, yeah, when it comes to traditional ʻIke, everything has pilina. How are you folks going to make that translate?
Right. We don't know. We're trying. I think, I mean, we're guessing and making educated guesses. I think you're absolutely right about kahalo opuna. And as soon as you said that, I was like, oh no, we have like millions of authority records that we need to make to collect these to all of the other things. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. But I just wanted to see if there were any overall reflections you had about the pieces we're trying to pull out. And if you think there's something, again, something makes sense, something doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it all makes sense. But it still needs to morph. It still needs to grow. It still needs, you know, because like with anything, right? Knowledge doesn't stay put in one day, right? Or in one place, right? And as the more you talk and the more like I'm seeing, you know, in the chat, like people have ideas and it needs to grow and it needs to move because that's the beautiful thing about it. But I think you're on the right track. I just think that you're going to have more tracks than you had anticipated.
Like you said, Maelia, we're in this, yeah?
I know, I saw that I was like, wait. You know, you academics. No, but, and it's a beautiful, but that's the way, you know, but that's the beautiful thing. It's that the chance to try and level the playing field of what is true, correct, ʻIke, right? That, you know, and not saying the stuff that, you know, that there's a level, there's a personal level of some information that Kumu or traditional practitioners are not going to give you because that comes with the ha. Yeah, that's going to be traditionally imparted. But there are things that are out there that everyone should know, that it's a general consensus, an agreement. Yeah, it's a, even though everybody has their individual, you know, from each moku, each ahupua'a, how even within our own, like, let's take hula world, right? How within the ʻili, within the ahupua'a, within the moku and the mokupuni, there are so many differences because our life was different. Yeah, our resources were different. So how we have differences but similarities, I think those are the things that you can start to pull together. you know, and create a level field. And just knowing that there are going to be practices that are not going to be in there. There is going to be ʻIke not shared. And it's okay, right? We don't have to hoʻolaha everything. We just need to make sure that it's accessible and everybody has an opportunity to get correct information.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about like what you said earlier, right? About how Gran knew like what to share when, right? Like how does our system embrace that? Is something that's sort of like coming to the front for me. But I just want to, yeah, again, thank you so much for sharing with us, right? Like, honestly, this is what we need. You know what I mean? Like, we need to wrestle with this. We need to talk about this. And so just as a heads up to where we're going in the future, you are actually the first of our consultants to see our current version of what we're wrestling with for ʻAina. And so in our next meeting, we're still playing around with the idea of, do we continue with individual meetings? Do we maybe group people since we're talking about, you know, specific subjects? And so just as a heads up, you know, as we move forward, we're still, you know, considering maybe doing a focus group, and you'll see an updated version of what you saw today.
I look forward to it.
Can I just ask one last thing before we close out? And mahalo to everyone that's been active in the chat. As you can see, this is still a very like moving process, and we're evolving and trying to figure out where this will take us eventually. But I'm just wondering, Kumelia, if you wouldn't mind sharing with us any of the hopes that you might have towards where this will help or bolster the vitality of your own practice as a kumu hula, as a mom, as a kanaka makalahui. If you wouldn't mind just sharing any like last takeaways about your hopes for how this can help the vitality of our lahui as well.
Well, I hope, you know, there's so much misinformation that's out there, that I'm hoping that with the care that you folks are giving into how knowledge is organized, how it's dispersed, that for the like even for my son's generation, right? So my son never got to know my mother, my grandmother. You know, at least like for me, I was able to grow up, and my tutu, my great grandmother was still alive. You know, I was still able to learn. For him, everything that's been given to him is either from me or what he's learning in school or on the internet, right? And so to have that, he doesn't get that benefit of that traditional knowledge from the source. So what I'm hoping for the next generation is that they're able to have a greater view to more traditional resources, you know, map things that like, I almost feel like the generation I grew up in trying to get information from archives and museum was like going through an iron door. Like it was like, you know, so much, it was just so much red tape at that point, it wasn't even worth it. But then the way that we would get information of going to the source, going to the hakumele, going to the kumu hula, going to those people who knew that information is dwindling, because now it's already second-hand information, you know? And so I would love for 2 generations, 3 generations from now to feel like they still have the voices of their kupuna in their ear, that they still feel that pilina because they can hear things in the words of kupuna, whether it's through video, whether it's through audio, that they have access to this so that they're not so far removed that they don't feel like it's valid. I don't know if that makes sense. But, you know, because sometimes it's like, if I'm the type of person, if I didn't hear it firsthand, then I'm going to be a little bit, you know, wary about it. I'm gonna look at it. I'll think about it, but I'm not gonna be like, oh yes, this is for sure. And so I want those generations to feel like they still have that pilina, and I think that's what for me this is all about, right? Is establishing that pilina between all of us, and making it so that the future generation is on point with what they're continuing.
Yeah. Mahalo nui for that. And Keahiahi, I want to offer you the opportunity to speak to that as well if you have anything else that you'd like to share as, yeah.
I think I appreciate vision holders like Maelia and like Shavonn, who can see the implications of this work for generations to come. It's a, right now being in the place that we're at, it's just a little bit difficult to see, right? Like the light at the end of the tunnel. It just feels like we're still wrestling and waiting and trying to find the map. And then that map's not the right map. And then how do you read the map? And where's the light to read the map? That's sort of what it feels like now. And so I just, like I said, I just appreciate the vision holders who can appreciate this work and who can see what our future looks like.
Agree. Just te leo mahalo nui a o lua for offering all the ʻIke that you have throughout this process and on this panel. And it's been really interesting to be able to see our audience members react and have discussion about how we're moving forward in this process. And we are so excited that we get to continue working with you, Kumu, Maelia. And I think that's about all. We are going to be starting our next session in about 45 minutes at 1:45. So for those of you who are here and joining us now, please come back at 1:45. We'll be having a roundtable talk story about knowledge organization. And so this conversation that we've just had is really going to flow nicely into that one about putting some of these concepts into practice and what are some of the other examples that are or models that are being done in other places as well, other communities as well. And so just mahalo nui, Maelia, for joining us and for sharing your time here.
It's been a pleasure.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to be in conversation with you, and just mahalo Keahiahi for bringing her on. It's just been so amazing to have all of these snippets of ʻIke from these conversations in this process. And to our attendees, mahalo for being here, and we will see you again at 1:45. Nui ke aloha, ahui ho.